And welcome everybody once again to our 122nd episode of the Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series. My name is Benji Cohn, and we have a fascinating topic today. I didn't mention this to you yesterday, Max, but one of my favorite things to do in the spring is bike around on my bicycle and just find all the wetlands where I can listen to the frogs and toads going. So we're going to talk about those today. So Max has been with the DNR. You're the Non-Game Wildlife Community Science Program Coordinator. That's a mouthful, correct?
Yep, that's right. It's a lot of words.
So, and you've sat just down the hall from me for a few years. So you've been with the DNR since 2009 and doing data management and field research projects in the non-game wildlife unit, correct?
Yep, that's right. Prior to taking the community science coordinator position, I worked with the biological survey doing data management and field research. So I've been with non-game wildlife since 2021.
Awesome. So I guess I'll just turn it over to you and we'll go from there.
Super. So I need to share my screen. Please let me know if I did this correctly. And
Looks great.
The call then goes away. Okay, so please let me know, Benji, if as I go along, the slides are not progressing, okay?
Will do.
All right. So thanks everybody for being here today. I'm really excited to be able to present and discuss this topic with you all. As Benji mentioned, I am the Community Science Program Coordinator for Non-Game Wildlife here at the Minnesota DNR. And just a brief run through of what we're going to do today, in the time that we have. I'm going to give an introduction about the Non-Game Wildlife Program, frogs and toads in Minnesota. Going to discuss how non-game wildlife monitors frog and toad populations. We're going to go through some tips to identify frogs and toads, and this is where the interactive part that Benji mentioned is going to come in. And then some ways that you can get involved with frog and toad conservation in Minnesota. And I mentioned a couple of times that I work in the non-game wildlife community science. I'm the community science program coordinator. And for anybody who does not know what that is, it's also often referred to as citizen science, crowdsourced science. I really like the term participatory science. I think that's really descriptive. But basically, all of these terms just mean the involvement of members of the public in scientific research. And so that's what my position is creating opportunities for the public to be involved in our research and also for us to expand the research that we're able to do with the help of volunteers from the public. And for anybody who does not know, the non-game wildlife program that I work for is part of the Ecological and Water Resources Division here at DNR. And we do a lot of things. It's a really diverse program, but in a nutshell, we're responsible for conservation and research of animals that are not hunted or fished. That's where the name non-game comes from. And this ends up being a lot of work with species that are rare, endangered, or for some other reason vulnerable to decline. It's a really fun program to work for. We get to do a lot of really cool stuff, and I'm grateful to be part of it. And today, the species that we're going to discuss are frogs and toads in Minnesota. And why would we be interested in this at all? Why do frogs and toads matter? Well, firstly, amphibian populations, including frogs and toads, have been documented to be in global decline. And this is true in Minnesota as well. Populations of frogs and toads are in trouble. This matters because they're an integral part of the food web. They are related to all of the animals that they exist with on the landscape. They eat a lot of things and a lot of things eat them. And so whenever we remove part of the food web, it can disrupt everything else. They're also excellent indicators of environmental health. And there are a number of reasons for this. We could do a whole presentation just about why they are indicators of environmental health. But to sum up, all of our frogs and toads have portions of their life cycle both in water and on land or terrestrially, and so they're very sensitive to changes in their environment. So if frog and toad populations are doing well, it's reasonable to conclude that the environment around them may be doing well. And if frog and toad populations are suffering, it's possible that the environment around them is also compromised in some way. And threats to frog and toad populations include habitat loss, degradation, habitat fragmentation, disease, and pollution. So they're really facing kind of a lot of challenges in their survival. So in Minnesota, we have 14 frog and toad species, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them. We have a lot more information available on our websites and at other various accompanying cooperating websites. From a taxonomic perspective, we can break our 14 species into 3 groups. The first group is true frogs, and that includes the ones that we see on the screen here. This is what many people picture when they think of a frog. The second group is tree frogs, and we have 5 species that fit into that group. And the last group is toads. We have 3 species of toad in Minnesota. Frogs and toads live everywhere in Minnesota in all 87 counties. Their specific breeding, non-breeding, and overwintering habitats vary by species. There's a lot of information out there about this. They do have some things, all species have some things in common, but some of them prefer deep lakes, some prefer shallow wetlands, some of them spend most of their life in the water, some spend most of their life on the land. So it really varies by species. I'd like to discuss some brief points about the habitat ecology of frogs and toads in Minnesota. One thing they have in common, as I mentioned, is that all of Minnesota's frogs and toads use both aquatic and terrestrial habitat at some point during their life cycle. Some species stay in water almost all of their life, and others spend a good deal of time on land. And this is another thing where we could do a whole talk about how frogs and toads overwinter in Minnesota. But to sum it up, there are 3 main strategies for how frogs spend the winter in Minnesota. Some species, such as American toads, burrow beneath the frost line. They do not freeze, and so they have to stay in soil that's above freezing. So they can burrow down quite a ways to get away from the cold. Some species, such as wood frogs, partially freeze in the leaf litter, and this is really fascinating. They actually pretty much freeze solid and spend the winter like that and then come back around in spring. And some species stay in the water under the ice, and they're able to respire or get oxygen through their skin. And sometimes you can even see them moving around under the ice, which is really weird. And when I say that there are 3 overwintering strategies, I don't mean that individual frogs are choosing what strategy am I going to use this winter. It's each species has a strategy that they use to get through the winter. One thing, again, that they all have in common is that all Minnesota frogs and toads breed and lay eggs in aquatic habitat. And that leads to discussing the breeding season ecology of Minnesota frogs and toads. Because they all breed in wetland habitat, all of our frogs and toads vocalize during the breeding season in that wetland habitat. And this, as a result of this, during the breeding season is the most reliable time for us to survey frog and toad populations, because we know they're going to be in those wetlands, and we know that they're going to be vocalizing because they're trying to attract mates and basically trying to be as conspicuous as possible, which is helpful for us because the rest of the time they're pretty hard to find. So we're able to use breeding season observations to evaluate species distribution and population changes and how those things are changing or not changing through time. But getting the breeding season observations is where it can get a little bit tricky, because all of the species breed and vocalize at different times based on habitat and environmental conditions, including air temperature, water temperature, and other things. And it can also vary a lot through the state. So a species may start calling in southeastern Minnesota in April, and they won't start calling in northern Minnesota until late May. So timing this can be kind of tricky, and it's really important to pay attention to the environmental conditions because that's what the species are responding to. So we do know that the frog call phenology remains relatively consistent, and phenology just means the timing with which natural phenomena happen, particularly in reference to cycles and the cycles of the season. So when I'm talking about frog call phenology, I'm talking about the relative timing of common frog and toad calls. And this is a video from the Cable Natural History Museum in Wisconsin that shows the relative timing of 8 of the most common species that we have here in Minnesota. So I'm going to play this call. I think I need to turn up my volume. All right, and Benji, please let me know if this does not come through.
Oh, we're not hearing it. I bet we forgot to click that little box when you were sharing.
Okay, that's a drag. 1 second, please. That's going to really mess everything up.
We had a couple questions in there, Jeff. Hey, thanks for commenting on my transparent hat. It's the beauty of a virtual background, I guess. We have a couple questions on the citizen science survey, so I know you're going to touch on that in a little bit too, but just to prepare you.
Okay.
Already asking about citizen science positions where they can survey. So
I am prepared. Okay, is the content sharing now?
it is.
Oops. All right, I'm going to go ahead and play it again because I know it got kind of cut off there. Sorry about that. All right, I really like that one a lot because it shows both the, oh, I don't want it to go again. Sorry. It shows both the relative order in which we expect to hear these things. So we know that wood frogs and chorus frogs, for example, are some of the first to start calling in the spring. It also shows that some of them call for a relatively short time, such as the wood frog. They usually only call for a couple of weeks. And some species, such as gray tree frogs, will just call basically all summer long. So let's see if I can advance through this without it playing again. There we go. So one of the ways in which we use these breeding calls to monitor frogs and toads is the statewide monitoring survey. I'm not going to go into great detail about the survey today because this topic is more about the frogs and toads and where they are in Minnesota and how we survey them. But I could do a whole talk about the statewide monitoring survey as well, and there's more information available on our websites. This was a long-term, is a long-term citizen science project. It started with limited route monitoring in 1994. The Minnesota DNR participated in the U.S. Geological Survey's North American monitoring program until 2015, and that was throughout North America. So looking at regional trends. But here in Minnesota, we had routes scattered throughout the state. And we did, I forgot to mention this, the survey did take a hiatus between 2018 and 2022 after we lost the support of the NAMP program, but we're in the process of bringing it back now. We had a great pilot season this year in 2023, and I'm looking forward to next year in 2024. At the height of the survey, Minnesota had more than 250 routes and more than 200 active volunteers at any given time. And the map on the right-hand part of the screen just shows the distribution of some of the routes across the state. And I will say this again in this talk, but thank you to all of the volunteers who came back this year to participate in the survey. This project would absolutely not be possible without all the volunteer support and hard work, so thank you. Yes, as I said, we relaunched in 2023. And the way that the survey actually works is that volunteers go out on a pre-designated route. They go to 10 stops per night. It has to be well after sunset and before about 2 a.m. They go 3 times a summer, and that's to get all of those early, mid, and late season callers that I described a couple slides ago. And they identify all of the frogs and toads by sound. So we're going to give another try with the audio. As part of the survey, you can imagine yourself out on the side of the road at night. You can close your eyes if you want, but you don't have to. And then people just record the frogs and toads that they hear by call. People get very familiar with their routes. And it is a really fun activity. And as I mentioned, it's the best way for us to be able to identify the frogs and toads that are out there on the landscape. The breeding vocalizations are by far the most reliable way to identify species. And we do split the Minnesota species into groups based on when they breed and call, although there is a lot of variation across the state, as I mentioned before. So I talked about the taxonomic groups of frogs and toads and how we divide those up. But for the practical purposes of the survey, we divide these into early, mid, and late season callers. We're going to go through some frog calls and do a little bit of practice just for fun. And I would like to put in a plug for mnemonic devices. These are just words or phrases or descriptions that can help you remember the different frog calls. And they're very useful for memorizing and recalling them. If you are going to go out and try to identify frogs by call, it's important when multiple species are calling to ID the most obvious ones first, the loudest and the most obvious. And then you want to kind of put those out of your mind and try to concentrate on detecting quieter or less obvious callers. Because sometimes the more, dominant species or the one with the most calling can be almost deafening. They can be quite loud. And like anything else, practice makes perfect. It takes a while to learn these and get good at them. They can sound confusing. Unfortunately for us, with the development of smartphones, it's possible to just take a recording. So if you're confused about what you're hearing, you can always get a recording for verification later. So with that, I'm going to move forward and talk about some of our early season callers. This includes chorus frogs, spring peepers, wood frogs, and leopard frogs. And I've added some of the mnemonic devices that people like to use to remember these calls. I will say that when you're developing mnemonic devices, develop your own. Somebody else might think it sounds like a fingernail running over a comb, for example, for the chorus frog, but maybe it sounds like something else to you, and that's perfectly fine. You should, do whatever works for you. So I'm going to play a couple of these calls, and hopefully not all of them at once. All right, so that was the chorus frog. A lot of people think that it sounds like a fingernail running over a comb. I tend to agree. Now I'm going to do the spring peeper. It's also one of the first to start calling in the spring. All right. Wood frog is one of my favorites. I think that it sounds like a bunch of ducks kind of feeding and arguing. All right, and lastly, the leopard frog, which honestly sounds a lot like somebody snoring. So if you've been camping and heard this noise, don't necessarily blame the people in the next campsite. It may have been leopard frogs. Oops. All right, I'm going to try to get to the next slide without all of these playing again. Ooh, that was a close one. So I'm going to move on to some of our mid-season callers, and at least one of these, most of you have probably heard at some point. The gray tree frog, the first one on the left here, is a really common species throughout Minnesota. They may live in your yard. They live in my yard. I hear them calling every night. And I don't have a mnemonic device for this one. It's just a short musical trill that kind of repeats itself. All right, and in the background of that call, there was another species calling that was a green frog, and we'll hear that one on the next slide. Cope's gray tree frog is visually identical to the gray tree frog, and their call is very similar, but it's just a little bit faster and less melodic. So very similar. We do have resources for practicing and studying this stuff online. And the best way, I think, to tell these two apart is to hear them calling at the same time. Then it becomes more apparent. And the last one I'm going to do on this slide of the mid-season callers is the American toad, which a lot of people have probably also heard, but maybe didn't know what it was. And they just do a sustained musical trill that I think seems like it goes on forever. Sorry, they all started to play at once at the end there. And when I was playing the American toad, you could hear, more toads sort of joining and joining in. And when you get a huge group of those calling, it's really, really loud. And it's pretty interesting. So lastly, I'd like to go through a couple of these late season callers. The first one that I have is the Blanchard's cricket frog, and it's actually our only state endangered frog. And we have a whole separate project looking for these throughout the state. They were once thought to be extirpated from the state and have since they've either come back or they've been rediscovered. Uh-oh. Hang on. There we go. It really likes to play all the noises at once. I'm sorry about that. So a lot of people think that the cricket frog sounds like pebbles being clacked together. I think it sounds more like ball bearings personally. But they sometimes will even respond to people who, if you just pick up two pebbles and click them together, they will think that's another frog and reply to that. I would also like to play the green frog. This is one of my favorites because it really sounds like a banjo string being plucked. And we've heard this one in a couple of the other audio clips that I played. All right, and then the last one we're going to do is the bullfrog. Bullfrogs are only native to the extreme southern and southeastern part of the state, but they've been expanding both on their own and also because people probably have transported them and released them. So any observations of the bullfrog, and I should have mentioned this, the cricket frog, are of interest to the non-game wildlife program. And please, do not release bullfrogs or their tadpoles anywhere in the environment, including in private ponds or goldfish ponds on your property. Okay, and hopefully the audio is working, or else somebody would have jumped in and told me because I cannot see any chat. So hopefully people have been paying attention as we went through some of these calls, because we're going to have an opportunity to sort of do a casual quiz and do a little bit of practice with some of these. So I've got 4 questions, I think. And Benji, do we have polling options set up? So I think if you
check that out and see if we got them going here. Looks like we are good to go. And Cassie will open that polling, and if you don't see the polling questions pop up, use those little ellipses on the lower right-hand corner and open those up. And then as she plays them, you'll be able to just answer what frog you think it is. So fun interactive time.
Yeah, and no pressure. I'm pretty sure that the poll is anonymous. So this is just for fun. So let's hear this first one. And this one I made a little easier by also including a picture. So anyone go ahead and throw your answers in the poll. I can see a couple people chiming in. So far, 100% everybody is correct. That is a bullfrog. So nice work. Let's see if I can get to the next slide. Oh, yep, I have the answer on there. This is bullfrog. It makes really deep bass sound. A lot of people think it says jogarum, but I think it just sounds like hrum. And that's what I was mentioning of other people's mnemonic devices may not work for you. Okay, so here is question 1. What species do you hear calling? All right, I see answers popping up. This is fun. I love these polling questions. Okay, we're neck and neck. The most votes so far are for spring peeper and boreal chorus frog. Remember, this is the one that sounds like a finger running down a comb. That is the boreal chorus frog. All right, we've got 2 more questions. All right, I'm just scrolling down in the poll here. And I can see, let's see. Sorry. All right, I've got a couple answers and I have a couple votes for spring peeper, which is in fact what that one is. That one I think, I feel like he just says his name, like peep, peep. Okay, we're gonna go to question number 3. This is a 2-parter, so prepare yourselves. The first question is, how many species can you hear calling in this audio clip? All right, I'm gonna try to scroll down to the answers. Either it's not working or nobody feels brave, which is perfectly all right. This is 3 species calling in this clip. And then the last question, or the second part of question 3, if anybody really wants to be brave, what 3 species did you hear? And I'm not quite able to see the end of the polling here. Oh, it looks like I did get a bunch of votes for 3, and a couple of people heard 2. Nobody said that they heard 4, which is, I think, correct. I've had a couple people think that they could hear a 4th species back there, but I have never heard it. So the last part of this is what 3 species? It looks like people are starting to weigh in on that one. And the answer is chorus frogs, gray tree frogs, and wood frogs. So there was like a continuous chorus of chorus frogs. And then you could hear the gray tree frogs come in, and there were just a couple of wood frogs, maybe 2 or 3, sort of quacking in the background there. So that was fun, and that is to go, which I'm sort of wrapping up here, and I do, WebEx.
I was going to say, Megs, we're losing you a little bit there for a second. So. Meg stopped their video there. She was just wrapping up. We'll see if we can get her back on here. You guys did pretty good on those polling questions. I'm impressed. I think Megs is just going to talk about the frog and toad conservation and the project that we have going on. So she does have a link for a form that I need to get from her. Looks like she just sent me a message that WebEx crashed on her end. So I apologize for the inconvenience there. While we're doing that, if you want to enter any of your questions into the Q&A part there, when we get Megs back here, we will get her on those questions so she can answer some of those. Okay. Megs, I got 2 of you on here. I'm going to expel the one, and hopefully it's the right one. And then we're going to try to unmute her. Unmute them. Excuse me. We are back. Can you hear us now, Megs?
Am I live?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Am I the only one who got booted?
I believe so.
Oh, well, I'm sorry about that. I all of a sudden got a WebEx error message, and it said it crashed and needed to close. So my apologies for the interruption. Wait, I'm not sharing the right thing here. Please.
I was just mentioning to everyone while you were gone that you were going to bring up a little bit of the toad conservation part and the possible survey. And I think you had a form that you sent me, but it was in the chat last time, and I don't have that link anymore. So if you get a chance, I can throw that in the chat for people too.
Yeah, let me grab that link. I only have a couple more slides, so let's get through these slides.
Yep, we can do it during the Q&A too. So.
And then, yeah, I'll throw that link in the chat. And I'm sorry, I apparently broke WebEx with my polling, so now we know.
Awesome.
And I don't have my camera on, but I don't see the window. So I'm just going to leave it like this. We're almost there. So this brings us around to, or kind of back to what DNR and Minnesota Non-Game Wildlife is doing with frog and toad conservation, and specifically with community science. I mentioned that the statewide monitoring survey took kind of a hiatus for a few years. It's been a really big priority to get that back rolling again. And I also am interested in sort of expanding the things that we do associated with frog and toad monitoring. So not just having the calling routes, we're still going to have those, but we're also going to add a frog and toad phenology project coming in next season. I wanted to try to get that rolling this season, and it just wasn't possible. So if people have heard me talk about it, that is still happening. It differs from the route calling survey a little bit, in that people can do the Phenology project from anywhere they want, as long as you do it from the same place all season. So if you have a wetland, near your house or even in your yard, that's something that you could participate in. And we also have a targeted survey for Blanchard's cricket frogs in partnership with the Amphibian and Reptile Survey of Minnesota and HerpMapper. And there's information about that available on our website. And the main point of that survey is to just discover where cricket frogs are and where they are not. So that's an easy one to participate in also. And I would like to thank the Amphibian and Reptile Survey of Minnesota and MN Herps for some of the images and audio that I used in this presentation today. Let's see, is it going to advance? Okay, and that is the end of my presentation material. I do want to thank everybody for your time, especially when I was booted out of WebEx. Again, thank you to all present, past, and future Frog and Toad volunteers. It would not be possible to do research at this scale without this, cohort of dedicated volunteers. And to all of our cooperating partners and contributors, both past and present, which are captured on the screen here. And thanks to everybody who let me use images and audio for the presentation today. So I will stop sharing.
It was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well, okay, my camera's back on. Hopefully I'm not going to crash it. And then let me grab the interest form. So I mentioned that, just let me add one more thing, Benji. That we relaunched the Frog and Toad Monitoring Survey in 2023, and we have other surveys coming. We also have the Cricket Frog Survey, and we have more surveys coming in 2024. This year, I only opened the survey to former volunteers, and so thank you to all of those volunteers. But we're going to open it up to more people in the coming seasons. And so the form that I'm going to put in the chat is just to express interest in participating in Frog and Toad. You're not signing up for anything. You're just giving us your information so that you can be on a contact list.
Great. And I know a couple people mentioned also that when you played that first slide with the calendar and how it went across, that they lost some volume. So hope you don't mind. I did link that in the chat also, so they can listen to that at their leisure. So.
Yeah, and that actually I got that from the Cable Natural History Museum website, and they also have some really good frog call, learning resources where they talk about the different species and how to identify them.
So, we can start with some Q&A. It looks like we have a ton of them here. So,
Great.
Carol, I think we kind of answered Carol's questions already. Are there any current citizen science positions open in the Frog and Toad survey area? We will get that form if you want to contact Mags about that for future years. I think we can do that.
Yeah, please do. This season is really sort of wrapping up. Cricket frogs may still be calling a little bit, but with it being so hot and dry, things are really coming to a wrap pretty quickly. So we're already looking ahead to next season.
And I think that kind of answers Judy's question too about is the DNR going to be involved in it? Obviously we are. So Jenny down here, how many volunteers did you have in the 2023 season? Do you plan to open this up to new volunteers in 2024? We just answered that one too, didn't we?
We did, and I had about 80 returning volunteers.
Looks like we had a couple poll question submitting things. That was the first time we've ever done that live. I think it worked other than we maybe crashed Megs' computer, but other than that, it seemed to work really well. So, and thank you for being flexible and jumping right back on with us. You hardly missed a beat there, so.
Oh, good. I mean, I'm putting the form link in the chat, so please let me know if it does not come through.
Okay. Jill asked, are there any actions we can take to help habitat for frogs and toads?
At a small scale, not really that I know of. It's more of a broad landscape scale problem. So, anytime wetlands get, eliminated, that's eliminating frog and toad habitat. So it's just something to really keep in mind. is that the more that we disrupt the landscape, the harder it makes it for these species to persist. And other people within DNR might have better answers to that question. I'm not a herpetologist, and I don't really work in landscape restoration. So it's possible that there are things and that I'm not aware of them. So if anybody knows, please let us know in the chat or whatever.
I wonder if there's any relationship. And my friend Jessica is an entomologist, and she gets on to everybody every year about raking leaves. And I'm like, so I don't rake my lawn. I rake a path to my shed. I kind of leave leaves. If I do rake anything, I rake it into the flower garden so they have that debris there to keep the bugs and stuff alive. And we were talking about my tree frog friend. I'm hoping maybe that helps that little guy too. So
I would think that it does. They are one of the species that just burrows down in there and freezes solid. And I'm pretty sure that I have annually tree frogs that return to my house every year as well. Or at least I like to imagine it's the same one.
Judy asked, have DNR staff seen any deformed frogs recently?
Not that I know of. So I am aware that that was a big deal in, what was it, the late 90s, I think. But it was actually PCA who conducted most of that investigation into that. I certainly haven't seen any deformed frogs lately, but I don't physically survey frogs. I only identify them by sound.
Kathy asked how she can volunteer. Megs, I do see the form that you submitted in the chat. So Kathy, if you want to click on the chat and click on that form, you can submit your information there for next year.
Please do. And, you know, as we're expanding the survey, you know, I learned a lot just in this first year about how this works. So just getting your name into the form and in our list will allow us to contact you going forward, because we don't have all of the information that we would like to have online and all of that. So that's something we're going to be working on over the winter. So the best way to get in touch is to fill out that form. And if for any reason it doesn't work for you, you can contact me directly by email.
Great. Gina's wondering, how common are the Cope's tree frogs and what is their range?
Ooh, that is a really good question. They are, I don't really know how common they are. It seems like they might kind of wax and wane as far as their populations. Um, and I think for a long time, this would be a better question for one of our actual staff herpetologists, right? Because for a long time, taxonomy is always changing, and especially as you know, genetic methods have become involved. So I think they were once thought to be the same species as the gray tree frog, and then it was like, oh no, now they're different species. So it's possible that old records, you know, are mixed up. Sorry, I just had something pop up here. And as far as their range, I forgot, and I'm going to have to look it up.
Ron was wondering, can you recommend a phone app for call ID and visual ID? I'm sure with all the apps out there, there's got to be one for frogs and toads.
So that is a really good question. I am not aware of one. And I don't know if that's because it doesn't exist or just because I am not aware of it. I use Merlin Bird ID, and it has the vocal recognition for bird calls. And if anybody does know of one, please reach out and let me know. I have not been aware of one, but I do think that it would be very helpful.
Didn't we used to have on our website, and maybe it's not there anymore, but a link where we could click on different frog species and play their sound? It wasn't an app, it was on our website, but
So we don't have that right now. I don't know if it ever was on our website or not. We previously were linking to the USGS.
Maybe that's what it was.
And so they have a resource for that. Another great resource that I will go ahead and throw in the chat right now, in addition to, this is the species profile from the Minnesota Herps webpage about the Cope's gray tree frog. It's from the Amphibian and Reptile Survey of Minnesota. And I'm just going to go ahead and throw their main webpage in the chat here, because They do an excellent job with reptile and amphibian conservation. This is where our cricket frog project is hosted, is at this MN Herps webpage. And they have, if you just go to that link, they have species profiles for all of Minnesota frogs and toads, including call resources. So we are building our website, back up, and we do plan to have that. And I know there used to be quizzes that you could take and stuff like that. And it's available elsewhere on the web, just not at our website yet.
Oh, yeah. It's a lot of work to build all that stuff. So
we're on our way. It's going to be great.
We might have to have a talk about frog deformities and studies. I know that you mentioned the PCA did a lot of that stuff years ago. Mary just had another question about it, so I'm going to have to refer you to the PCA and see if you can find any information on that, because I have not heard an update about any of that research either. So Jean was she has a comment. She's enjoying this, and it's great information, so thank you, Jane.
Great.
Whitney was wondering what we can do in our yards to create habitat for these little buddies. We're not habitat specialists, but
right, we are not habitat specialists. I'm more of a habitat generalist. I think your suggestion about not raking up all the leaves all the time, I think anything that we can do to make our yards less sterile is helpful, not only for frogs and toads, but also for, invertebrates, pollinators, birds, and other animals. So anything that you can do to not just have an expanse of highly fertilized, trimmed lawn will be providing habitat. And at least at my house, I put all my house plants out on the deck every year, and tree frogs live in them, and it's really fun. But then when I bring them in the fall, I have to find all the frogs and put them back outside.
It's probably a fun task, though.
Kind of a mixed bag.
It's I get asked these questions a lot too, and I mean, just the ecology of life, all this stuff is connected. So everything you do, from fertilizing your lawn, salt your driveway, all that stuff has an effect on all these critters. So doing the best you can to just not introduce pollutants to the environment is just a good idea in general. So we can start with our own yards and driveways and proceed from there. So Jeff had a question. Do toads start as tadpoles also?
Yes. But they make the switch really quickly. So they go from being tadpoles to being teensy little toadlets pretty fast. And you may have seen them, in your yard or in parks or whatever. When they get ready, they all kind of tend to come out at the same time, and there'll just be a bazillion of these little itty bitty toads that are like the size of a pencil eraser hopping around.
And there's thousands of them. We were down on the beach one day just playing with the girls, and there's thousands of these little tiny frogs because they all came out, like you said, at one time, and it's kind of cool.
It's pretty great.
Judy she has a comment in here in the Q&A section. I believe she's from the PCA. I believe she works over there, but she said you need to sample a lot of young of the year to document deformities. So there's a lot of work that goes into that, I'm sure.
Thank you for that, Judy. I'm aware that this was an issue that came up, and that people were looking into it in the past. But I think it was kind of people noticed that this was a problem, and so PCA or maybe others did their best to try to look into it. But there's not a sustained effort at examining, designed to examine that phenomenon, at least in Minnesota.
Ellie has a hard question, because I have an artificial pond in my backyard too, Ellie, and she has an artificial pond that's a favorite spot for frogs to live and breed. It's not that deep, so it's not a good place for them to overwinter. You mentioned not moving or relocating frogs. I don't want them to die. What do you think I could do to help them?
So other people might have better information about this. Like I said, my focus is in community science and kind of species ecology in general. I'm not a herpetologist, But with frogs and toads and some other species as well, they're going to look for a place to overwinter where they think or feel or know with their frog intuition that they'll be able to have what they need to make it through the winter. So if it were I and I had a pond, I would probably drain it down early enough. If you do drain it down, I would drain it down early enough that it signals to them, hey, this is not a good place to spend the winter. There's not going to be water here that's going to sustain you all winter long, and they'll move on. And they found your pond in the first place. They can move away from it as well. Where we get into problems is where animals have already kind of hunkered down for the winter, and then we change up the situation on them. And I think that is probably what would lead them to die. But other people might have better advice about that. Maybe one of our regional non-game biologists would have information about that. And it also depends on the species too and what their overwintering strategy is. So if you have tree frogs out there or wood frogs, they're going to go overwinter in the leaf litter anyway. And if it's American toads, they're going to burrow down into the soil. It's really only a few species that would be trying to overwinter aquatically in your pond.
And if you're a birder, I know one year I put a little circulator aerator pump in mine so the birds could come down and drink out of it, which would probably keep the water open enough to support the underwater frogs also. Probably won't
Probably, yeah.
freeze all the way. I never thought about it for the frogs, but I like having the birds come down and have access to water back there. Another great presentation. Thank you, Jane. Griffin, sorry if this is already answered. Wondering the easiest way to get involved if I lived in the Twin Cities area. So again, Griffin, Megs did put that form in the chat function. Click on that and fill that out. That's going to be, I believe, the best way to stay informed about the Frog and Toad survey in the future. So
Yep,
Lisa
and
was wondering.
Oh, sorry. We will also be updating our website, so there will be information available on there. But if for now, if we're getting involved, the best way is to fill out that form. And in the metro area, it's going to be all three of the surveys are options. So the route monitoring, the phenology survey, and the cricket frog survey.
Great. Lisa is wondering if we can do this earlier next year. It was great. So for your information, Lisa, this will be recorded and you can share it with all your friends as early as you want next year. So it'll be on our website, mndnr.gov/discover. By next week, hopefully it'll be in the past programs and you can share away.
Yep, and anybody, I mean, if you fill out the form, you're not like saying, I'm signing up for this thing. You're just saying, I want to hear information about these programs. So even if you just want to hear information, but you don't intend to participate, you can still fill out the form and then you'll get updates about what's going on with frogs and toads.
Yeah. And I know we're running really close in time, so if we don't get to all these questions, please reach out to myself or Mags and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Jeff had a question with our dry summers. Are we seeing wetlands, or we are seeing wetlands dry up in our area? Is this negatively impacting tadpole survival or frog populations?
Probably. It depends on the type of wetland and the species that are in there. So, if a wetland does dry completely up, it's probably going to compromise anything that's in there that's not mobile. So anything that has not yet reached its adult form. And that's part of the reason that we're monitoring these populations, is that they can handle a year here and there where some wetlands dry up. But if this starts to become a consistent pattern or, webs, they're drying up every year, then that's really not suitable habitat for them anymore.
Carol had a question about reporting deformed frogs. That's a PCA thing. So Carol, look under the PCA and see if we can find a place there to do that.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody is currently collecting that information, but we at DNR Non-Game Wildlife are not collecting those observations.
Margaret, I had the same question for Megs yesterday. I have a frog that lives in my umbrella post every year. Is it possibly the same frog? And I learned that mine was a tree frog, would you say 7 years?
I Googled it, so full disclosure, I have not done this research myself, but it did say that they can live about 7 to 9 years, gray tree frogs in the wild. And I'm pretty, like, I have tree frogs here. Some are really little and then some are bigger. And I am quite sure that I have had one of like the same frog back year after year. Because he goes to the same spots, and I don't know, it just seems like it's the same guy, but I guess that can't be positive.
Our friend Judy put a question here. It looks like she wrote a book. My book, Pearl in the Ponds, covered issues related to widespread frog deformities in Minnesota in more than 40 states. So Judy, thank you for sharing that. If anybody's interested in the frog deformities, Pearl in the Ponds was Judy's
Yep.
book. So
Thank you for that, Judy. I'm just jotting down that title.
Daniel, can you briefly list the difference between frogs and toads?
I can't because it would not be brief, and we are almost out of time. But we do on our Minnesota DNR Frog and Toad webpage, which I think was going to be the link that you were going to put for people at the end.
Yes.
It goes over, some of those taxonomic and behavior and physical and other differences.
Great. And for those of you joining us, usually when you close out of this, you'll have a quick survey and it'll direct you to our non-game frog and toad survey page where you can link to any of those other questions. And Megs, is your information on there also?
It is not. So if I don't know if we want to put my email in the chat or
I'll let you do that so I don't mess it up and send it to the other Margaret.
okay. Yeah, there's another Margaret Edwards.
And of course, everybody, you're always more than welcome to reach out to me at minnesotadnr.gov/discover. My email is on that page and I can connect you to. So.
Okay. So, and anybody, please feel free to reach out. I would love to talk about this. And I think it was Daniel with the frog and toad question. Sorry, I didn't have time to answer that. And also, I'm not the best person to answer it. Like, I don't have that information just offhand to rattle off, which is maybe a little bit embarrassing. But I am not a herpetologist. I'm more of a generalist.
I know a lot more information. I don't know a lot more information than I'll ever know. So
My short answer would be toads are bumpier and tend to live on land, but I'm pretty sure that there's more information than that available.
And they have shorter legs and they're fed around.
They have shorter legs. Yep. I think we nailed it, Benji.
The general answer, I think so.
We got it taken care of.
Probably get a certificate for that. So
Mhm.
I can't thank you enough for, everybody for joining us today. We were just running out of time. So Megs did a fantastic presentation. Everybody seemed to really enjoy it. And I hope everybody has a safe weekend. Stay cool out there. Get out and hopefully you can listen to some frogs. There's a few species still out there calling. So get out and visit your local wetlands and visit the forum, join Megs, or fill out the forms, and maybe you can get involved next year and we'll go from there. So thank you very much. Hopefully we'll see you next week. And till then, stay safe.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's been fun.